When I graduated from college, I got a new job as an accountant in Chicago. I was looking for a place to live and found a room for rent on Craigslist in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. The rent was reasonable, and it was close to work, making it the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 28, and her name was Terry. She was short and stocky, had jet black hair, and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, though a little quiet, but she liked me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good, I thought. On my first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I noticed something was a bit off about her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Pete Davidson. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like Pete Davidson, so it really didn't make any sense to me. When we returned home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in pictures of Pete Davidson. She even had magazine stories about him pinned all over her mirror and owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy as shit. She had been saying I looked like him the whole night, and now it was obvious to me that she was obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed and I rarely saw her. We didn't spend any time together. She would come home from work and practically run to her room, where she would spend the rest of the night. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle that I could hear through the walls. I wondered what on earth she could possibly be doing in there. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for about 2 minutes, always slurring her words. I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything and would just stand in the hallway, watching me in the living room. I would turn and see her, surprised, and say, "Hey, Terry," only to be met with a long, awkward pause, followed by her creepy giggle. It was really uncomfortable being around her. She sort of freaked me out a lot. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Terry standing at the front door. She had her face against it and was turning the lock back and forth over and over again, and every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Randy. 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 Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. It didn't help that she kinda looked like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching television when she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the show, which was annoying. She then asked if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I said sure, and awkwardly sat back to listen. 10 minutes into her story, she was so riled up, screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried the neighbors would call the cops, and she wasn't listening when I asked her to tone it down a bit. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she thanked me for listening and started her giggle again. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to sleep. I had a weird feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse, there was no lock on my bedroom door. I decided to push the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Terry was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I heard her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, my heart dropped when I went out into the hallway. I saw one of her steak knives on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I'd had enough of her craziness. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month later, she reached out to me. I was at the movies, and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on. I was shocked to see like 50 text messages from her sent over the past couple of hours. They were all insane texts ranging from "Hi, how are you?" to "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and thankfully I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It still freaks me out to think about it.
When I was 23, I moved 1,500 miles away from my Midwest home to this beautiful place along the Willamette River in Portland, Oregon. I had a new job, a new car, and a nice apartment. But I didn't know a soul outside of work. If my phone rang, I expected to hear from a faraway family member or my long-distance boyfriend who was still in college. This was a landline, no cell phones yet. Despite being very alone, I managed well with the excitement of all the new things in my life. I had only lived there for about 2 weeks when the unwanted calls started. The first call came from a man with a friendly voice who asked what I was doing. I couldn't place him and thought maybe it was one of my cousins or uncles. I have a huge, extended family. I asked his name. He laughed a little, and his tone became dark, a bit angry. He said, "You know exactly who this is, darling." I paused, deciding whether this guy had simply called the wrong number or was a creep. I chose the former, laughed, and politely told him he had the wrong number. He then recited my brand new, unlisted, unpublished phone number and my name. I mean, what the hell? An intense chill raced through me. I had only given my new number to my parents, sister, boyfriend, apartment manager, and employer. I was new to this city and was feeling totally creeped out. He didn't like it when I told him he had called the wrong number and started yelling at me. Then, in a much calmer voice, he told me the many vulgar things he was going to do to me. I hung up and brushed it off. He called again around 1 a.m., and I quickly told him to F off and hung up. He kept calling, so I unplugged the phone and went back to sleep. However, as days went by, the calls continued and escalated. He started mentioning personal things about me. He said he liked the white quilt on my bed, knew what was in my fridge, and that he was allergic to cats. I had one. He then asked me if I was in love with Emily. As I listened to his words, I stood in my kitchen, looking at the calendar taped to the fridge. It had Emily written in pink on the 17th with a heart around it, because Emily is my sister, and the 17th is her birthday. I started shaking and crying because I suddenly realized this creep had been in my apartment. I was alone, with no friends or family to run to for the night. It was me versus a creepy mystery man. I didn't sleep much that night. Early the next morning, I talked to the apartment complex manager before heading to work, telling her what had happened and that I wanted the locks changed that day. She got a weird look on her face, and after a long pause, she said she knew who'd been in my apartment and that it won't happen again. What? It turned out she had a creepy maintenance guy who noticed a young woman moving into an apartment alone and thought I was his new pet. She had the locks changed immediately and promised she would personally keep the other key. Although the calls stopped, I was paranoid for a year as I came and went from my apartment because I never even knew what this guy looked like. I moved out the moment my lease was up. Only after thinking about it years later did I realize that her weird expression likely meant it had happened before. Plus, she didn't even fire him. I regret not calling the cops. I was just too young and naive at the time.
In 2013, I worked at a retail clothing store with my girlfriend Paula. We were both 18 years old, and we tried to work as many shifts together as possible to maximize our time together, since she was still in school. My father had recently purchased a Sprinter van for his business, and since my car was being serviced overnight, I got to drive the van. Paula and I loved the nights we got to take the van because it usually had the back seats installed, and the tinted windows meant we could have some privacy, which is great for teens who still live at home. That night, we only had one row of seats in the back, just behind the driver and passenger. Paula and I parked near each other like we always did, and worked our evening shift, closing the store with a few of our co-workers. We all left together, and I helped the manager lock up because the glass doors needed to be aligned properly for the lock to engage. It was early March in New Jersey, and still freezing outside, so Paula usually starts her car to warm it up, and then sits with me in the van as it warms up. When I got to the vehicles, her car is idling, and she's already in the van. It was dark and cold, and it never occurred to me how she got inside already. She sits with me, chatting for a while, then sits on my lap, and we make out for a bit, but we decide it's too late and too cold to have a little fun in the back. We drive home separately from work every night while talking on the phone. She usually gets home first, and I stay on the line while she walks up her long driveway in the dark. That night, I made it home first for some reason, and I knew I had a lot of stuff to carry in, so when I'm close to home, I tell her I'll call her back in a little bit. She asked me to stay on the line because she was almost home, and didn't like walking past the dark bushes next to her driveway. I stay on the phone as I'm lugging everything I'm carrying out of the van. I know I locked and armed the van as I remember fumbling with the key fob to lock the vehicle. I dropped a few things on the driveway while struggling to keep the phone to my ear. The motion lights illuminated the whole area, so I could see everything I had dropped. We both made it inside safely, and decided not to stay on the phone because she had school in the morning. I begin to doze off almost immediately in my bedroom. I lived with my parents, who built the house to accommodate my mother's aging parents, who have Alzheimer's. The driveway runs parallel to our basement, which has 2 garage doors, an entrance door, and the French doors to my bedroom. I'm falling asleep as all the motion lights finally turn off, and now my room is completely dark. It wasn't even 20 minutes later when I was jarred awake by the alarm sirens of the van. All the motion lights are on, and the flashing lights of the van's alarm are filling my room. I left the key fob upstairs in the main part of the house, so I ran upstairs to silence the alarm in the kitchen. As I grab the fob, my dad comes running downstairs in his boxers, my grandma shows up in her nightgown, and I'm still in my boxers as well. My dad grunts as he sees me grabbing the fob, but what my grandma says sends shivers down my spine. She asked why I was running around outside at this time of night. I tell her that I was sleeping, but she insisted that I was outside, setting off the van alarm. My grandparents' bedroom sits above the garage doors, looking down over the driveway and the van. I'm assuming she's confused. She has Alzheimer's after all. The goosebumps from her exclamation prompted me to grab a knife from the butcher block anyway, and my dad followed with a baseball bat. We both walk outside cautiously in our boxers, even though it's freezing cold. The driveway is still lit up and the alarm is blasting away. Even the interior lights are all flashing. I remember that specifically because I'd never seen a car alarm do that. We silence the alarm and start looking around. My dad says he thinks a deer may have run out of the woods in the dark and hit the van. I don't say anything as we investigate. But when I reach the back of the van, I notice the door was wide open. The van has a feature that if the vehicle alarm is armed and a door is opened, either from the inside or outside, the siren goes off. But how? I know I locked and armed it, hence the blaring alarm. That's when I realized the door had been opened from the inside. My blood ran cold. The door is open, so the inside lights are still on. I see the empty space behind the row of seats, and there are wadded up napkins and a chip bag. I knew right away they weren't ours. It suddenly dawned on me that someone must have been in the van with me the entire drive home. I must have left the van unlocked by mistake when I went into work, and that's how Paula got into the van without the keys. I just hadn't put 2 and 2 together at the time. Was it a homeless person escaping the cold? Or someone with a lot worse intentions in mind? What if I had gotten off the phone like I wanted to? If they had wanted to do bad things, the fact that I was on the phone might have saved my life because Paula would have raised hell if she heard me being attacked. I get chills every time I think about it. We didn't call the police because my father was skeptical of my explanation, but my gut tells me that I didn't drive home alone that night. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.